At 58, after 31 years of marriage, Lenny Ashwood walked out of a courtroom in Claremont County with a tote bag, a mud-caked Land Cruiser, and the deed to her father's stable on a limestone ridge in the Texas Hill Country. It was the only asset her husband's attorneys hadn't considered worth arguing over. Chet kept the ranch, the cattle operation, the accounts, and the woman he'd been spending weekends with for 2 years. Lenny drove west with $180 in her checking account and the windows down. The courtroom smelled like recycled air and old carpet. Lenny sat in a chair with padded armrests that had been repaired with electrical tape and listened while a judge read settlement terms in a voice that suggested he had 6 more of these before lunch. Chet wasn't there. He'd sent his attorney, a man named Pruitt, compact, silver-haired, in a suit the color of old money, who kept a legal pad open in front of him that he never actually wrote on. Some men take your house. Some men take the version of yourself you'd spent 3 decades becoming. Chet Ashwood took the Ridgeback Ranch, the breeding program she'd helped him build from 12 head to 240, and the name she'd answered to since she was 27 years old. She signed where Pruitt pointed. 3 signatures. 1 initial. A marriage reduced to 40 pages and a return envelope. The attorney slid a single page across the table without looking up. This is the asset disclosure, Mrs. Ashwood. The Ridgeback property, livestock, equipment inventory, and the joint retirement portfolio remain with Mr. Ashwood under the terms. You retain the 2008 Land Cruiser, personal effects, and the parcel designated as the Harwell Stable and Training Facility, Limestone County, Rural Route 9. The Harwell Stable. Her father's place. A name she hadn't said aloud in years. Pruitt had told her in the pre-negotiation that Chet's team appraised the property at $11,000, which included the land, the structure, and, his word, the salvage. They'd offered her nothing else of value and let her take it without hesitation, the way you let someone have the last scoop from an ice cream carton that's already mostly freezer burn. Lenny picked up her tote bag from the floor. Inside was what Chet had left on the kitchen table with a post-it note that said your things. A silver bracelet her mother gave her the year she turned 40. A recipe box her daughter Willa had painted when she was 7. A photograph in a drugstore frame. Lenny standing in front of a horse with her eyes squinting into afternoon sun, looking like she knew exactly where she was supposed to be. She hadn't seen that photograph in years. She didn't know Chet still had it. She didn't know why he'd let her keep it. Maybe he hadn't noticed it at all. She walked to the parking lot. The Land Cruiser was parked at the far end, a 2008 model with a cracked side mirror, bald rear tires, and a passenger seat that held the permanent shape of whoever sat there last. The truck had been hers since before the marriage. Over the years, it had been repainted once, re-engined once, and used for everything the ranch trucks were considered too good for. When the divorce was filed, Chet's attorney listed it at nominal value and didn't contest it. Lenny sat in the cab for a long time. She had no particular destination in the short term and no plan beyond the deed in the folder on the passenger seat. The ranch on Ridgeback Road was Chet's now. Her daughter was in Austin, finishing a graduate degree she'd chosen partly to have a reason not to come home. Her friends, she understood now, had always been Chet's friends first, which meant they were Chet's friends again, which meant they were not hers. She pulled the deed out and held it. Harwell Stable and Training Facility, Rural Route 9, Limestone County. Deeded to Lenny Jean Ashwood under the terms of the last will and testament of Buford Creed Harwell, deceased. Her father, gone 11 years. She'd driven down for the funeral, spent 4 days sorting his belongings, then locked the stable door and never went back. Chet said the property was a liability, taxes, upkeep, liability insurance on livestock facilities. Lenny hadn't argued. She rarely argued with Chet about assets. That had been the arrangement, though no one ever stated it plainly. She turned the key. The Land Cruiser started on the first try, the engine settling into the low rumble she'd known for years. She pulled out of the courthouse parking lot and pointed west toward Limestone Country. The drive took 3.5 hours. Highway gave way to Tulane Blacktop, which curved into County Road, which narrowed into Rural Route 9, a strip of patched asphalt threading through cedar and live oak and scattered hills that turned amber in afternoon light. The sky out here was different from anything in suburban Claremont County. It went on longer. It committed to itself in a way the sky over a subdivision never did. Lenny cracked the window. The air smelled like cedar shavings and dry grass, and something underneath. Limestone dust, the particular mineral scent of this part of the state, and the combination of it reached somewhere in her chest that she hadn't known was still open. She remembered this road from the summers she'd spent here as a girl. Her mother would drive her out at the start of June, and Buford would have her mucking stalls by the following morning. He ran a training and boarding facility for working ranch horses. Nothing fancy, no show circuit, no ribbons on the wall. Just animals that needed to be quiet under a rider and useful on a spread, and a man who knew how to make them that way. He taught Lenny to read a horse's weight shift before the animal had finished deciding what it was going to do. He taught her to shoe a hoof, to assess a tendon, to tell the difference between a horse that was protecting an injury and one that was being stubborn. She could assess a horse's dental age by the time she was 13. Chet had found that charming when they were dating. Later, he found it inconvenient. A rancher's wife who wanted to keep talking about horses like she knew something, instead of standing at the fence looking admiring while he talked to the trainer he'd hired. He never told her to stop. He just stopped asking her opinion, and eventually she stopped offering it. The way you stop offering anything when the person next to you has decided they already have what they need. Route 9 climbed and flattened and climbed again. Lenny passed a shuttered feed store, a water tower with a county name stenciled in faded paint, a church with a hand-painted message board by the road. Then the road bent around a stand of cedar, and there it was. The Harwell stable. It was smaller than she remembered, which was the way of places from childhood. A central barn of weathered board and batten, gray as driftwood, with a corrugated metal roof that had gone rust orange along the seams. A covered arena to the left, the roof still intact but the rails of the round pen leaning. For paddocks behind, their fencing in various states of surrender to time and weather. A small frame house set back from the barn where her father had lived his last 20 years alone. The place looked abandoned. It looked like it was waiting for someone to confirm that and sign something official. But the walls were holding. Lenny climbed out and stood in the gravel lot, which was the same gravel. She could feel it, just more scattered. The barn door was padlocked with a combination lock. She pulled the key ring from the folder and tried the second key. Wrong. The third. The padlock opened with a sound like a held breath released. Inside, the air was cool and still and dark, threaded with the smell of old hay and horse and cedar and something else she recognized without naming. The specific atmosphere of a working barn that had been given time to remember what it was. A center aisle ran the length of the building. 8 stalls to a side, though half had no doors remaining, just open frames. At the far end, above what had been the tack room, a wooden sign hung from 2 nails. Burned letters, her father's work, Harwell Stable and Training, EST 1971. She walked the aisle slowly. At the tack room entrance, a wooden stool sat exactly where her father always kept it, angled toward the door the way he angled it when he wanted to watch horses move in the round pen while he worked on tack. His leather apron hung on a nail beside the door. Still there. 11 years, and no one had moved it. Lenny took it down and held it. The leather was stiff and dry but uncracked. She could smell the neat's foot oil he rubbed into it every spring. She hung it back on the nail. She wasn't going to sell this place. The thought arrived without drama, without a specific moment she could point to. Just a fact, already decided, waiting for her to notice it. The house was intact in the way that things are intact when someone loved them before they left. Her father had kept it. The floors were swept. The kitchen had a percolator on the counter and a coffee can beside it that still held grounds, dry and stale but present. The bedroom had a made bed, a quilt her grandmother had sewn, faded but whole. In the front room, there was a roll-top desk Lenny had not thought about in decades. Closed. She sat in the chair in front of it and ran her fingers along the edge. She rolled it open. Inside, a leather-bound ledger, a cigar box with a latch, and a stack of folded letters held together with a rubber band. She opened the ledger first. Her father's handwriting, compressed, practical, each letter committed to the page. The first entry was dated April 3rd, 1974. Took in the Bledsoe gelding at no charge. Boy's got talent, no money. Worked him for 4 months. Horse is solid now. Didn't charge the family. She turned the page. Daphne Creel boarded her 2 Mares through the winter after Hector passed. Said she couldn't pay until spring. Told her spring was fine. She brought bread every week. Better payment than most. Page after page. Decades of ledger entries, each one a record her father had kept without showing anyone. Horses trained for reduced fees, board forgiven for families in hard years, equipment loaned without documentation, farrier work done for nothing because the person asking couldn't manage the bill. The amounts were modest. The consistency was not. Lenny read until the light through the window told her it was evening. She opened the cigar box. Inside, $43 in small bills. A set of keys she didn't recognize. A photograph, face down. She turned it over. Her father, younger than she'd thought of him in years, standing in the aisle of the barn with a hand resting on the neck of a gray horse. He was looking at the camera with an expression she recognized. Not quite a smile, but the face of a man who was exactly where he was supposed to be. She unfolded the letters. There were 6, each one addressed to her father in different hands. Simple notes on lined paper, on receipts, on the backs of envelopes. Each one expressing gratitude for something he had done and never mentioned. A woman named Daphne whose son learned to ride on a horse her father trained and gave them use of for 2 summers. A man named Corbett who said her father's willingness to take on his broke-down quarter horse had saved the animal's life and, incidentally, his own sense of purpose that year. The last letter was the one she had to set down for a moment. It was in her own handwriting. She didn't remember writing it. The postmark was 1987. She would have been 19. Daddy, I know I didn't say it when I left this summer, but I want you to know that what you do out there matters. I can tell from the way people talk about this place. I'll come back. I promise. She had not come back for 34 years. She set the letter on the desk and looked out the front window at the barn going dark in the evening light. She slept in the house that night in her clothes, under the quilt. In the morning, she washed her face from the sink, found a jar of instant coffee in the cabinet, and stood on the porch with a mug watching the paddocks emerge from the early light. The immediate problems were physical and extensive. The paddock fencing needed replacement in at least 3 sections. The round pen rails had to come down entirely and be rebuilt. The barn roof over the 2 southernmost stalls was sagging, not compromised yet, but close. The tack room needed cleaning, oiling, restoring. The small pasture behind the property was overgrown with cedar encroachment that would have to be cut back before any animal could use it safely. She had $180. She started where she could. She walked the property with a legal pad she found in the desk and documented everything. She crawled under the barn floor where the concrete footers met the ground and assessed the foundation. She climbed the fence posts and tested each one by hand. She made the list without panic, which surprised her. The list was long and she had almost nothing, and she felt neither hopeful nor desperate, just clear. A truck turned off Route 9 into the gravel lot that afternoon. A woman climbed out, late 60s, sun-worn, wearing barn clothes that had been washed many times. She stood by her truck and looked at Lenny on the porch. I saw the Land Cruiser. Wondered if someone finally came. Her name was Aldine. She had boarded horses with Lenny's father for 19 years. She had a small operation 8 miles east and had been watching the property from the road since Buford died, not intrusively, just the way you watch a place that matters to you, noting whether it's still standing. I would have bought it, Aldine said, but it didn't feel right. It felt like it should stay Harwell. She stayed for 2 hours. She knew the property the way someone knows a place they've worked in, its drainage problems, its shady spots, which stall horses preferred in summer heat. She knew which section of fence the previous owner had repaired wrong and which part of the arena footing had been replaced and which hadn't. Before she left, she said, I've got cedar posts. Been meaning to clear some from my back acreage for 2 years. You could have them if you're willing to pull them yourself. Lenny drove out the next morning with a chainsaw she found in the barn and came back with enough posts to start the round pen. The man who helped her set them was named Audie. He had been her father's part-time hand for the last 6 years of his life, a quiet, methodical man in his mid-50s with enormous hands and a habit of showing up early and staying as long as something needed doing. He had heard through Aldine that someone was at the Harwell place and had driven out on a Thursday morning unannounced, stood in the lot, looked at the barn, and said, I can spare some time, if it's useful. It was useful. Audie worked without instructions. He looked at what needed doing and did it, moving from task to task with the deliberate economy of someone who had spent decades not wasting effort. He replaced the round pen rails while Lenny rehung the stall doors. He restretched the fence wire in the north paddock, while she cleaned out the tack room and began oiling the leather that had been sitting dry for 11 years. She paid him when she could. He didn't press her when she couldn't. "Your dad never charged me full rate for boarding when my operation was thin," he said one afternoon, not looking up from the fence stretcher. "This feels like the right place to put that." The first horse arrived in the 4th week. A rancher named Tilson from 2 counties east had heard from Aldine that the Harwell stable was reopening. He had a 3-year-old that had been badly started, anxious, defensive, with a habit of coming apart under a rider at unpredictable moments. 2 trainers had worked him and given up. Tilson didn't want to sell the horse. He wanted someone to make the animal right. He drove out on a Saturday and stood at the round pen fence and watched Lenny work the gelding at Liberty for 40 minutes without saying anything. She wasn't asking the horse to do much, just to move and breathe and eventually choose to slow down near her, which it did twice before he walked away again. That was enough for the first session. Tilson leaned on the fence rail. "Buford used to say the same thing you're doing is what you're doing," he said. "Never thought I understood that until just now." He left the horse and said he'd come back in 6 weeks. She ran the stable the way she believed her father would have, meaning she ran it the way she had always known things should be done and had spent 31 years not doing. When a young woman came out with a mare that needed training and an explanation about her budget that she clearly found embarrassing to give, Lenny quoted her a number that covered costs and nothing beyond them. When an elderly man brought his horse in for a lameness evaluation and mentioned twice that he wasn't sure he could manage the vet fees, Lenny called the veterinarian herself, a woman named Dr. Thorne, who had also known her father, and arranged a rate that fit. She wasn't being generous. She was being accurate about what mattered. Audie observed this without commenting on it. One afternoon, handing her a coffee that had gone cold while she was working in the round pen, he said, "Buford used to say the measure of an operation isn't what it charges. It's what it fixes." "He said that to you?" "Said it to anyone who'd stand still long enough." She thought about Chet, about the breeding program they'd built, the numbers, the bloodlines, the carefully maintained reputation, about how every conversation about those horses eventually came back to per head value and what the market was doing, about how she'd stopped saying certain things in those conversations and started saying them here instead, to Aldine and Audie and Tilson and a growing number of people who drove out to rural Route 9 because word had made its way through the county that the Harwell stable was open again. Willa came in October. She arrived in a rental car on a Friday afternoon, stepped out in boots that had last seen serious use when she was a teenager, and stood in the gravel lot looking at the barn for a long time before she said anything. "It looks like his pictures," she said finally. "It looks like his place," Lenny said from the barn door. They walked the property together. Lenny showed her the ledger, the letters, the leather apron on its nail. She showed her the stall doors Audie had rehung, the round pen rebuilt from Aldine cedar posts, the 3 horses currently in residence, Tilson's gelding, and 2 boarders who'd come in the previous week. Willa stood at the round pen fence and watched the gelding move. "How are you actually doing?" she asked. "Better than I expected," Lenny said. "Better than I've been in a long time. I was worried." "I know. I didn't think." Willa stopped. Started again. "I didn't think this was going to be enough for you. I thought you'd get out here and feel like you were retreating." "I thought so too." Lenny leaned on the fence. The gelding slowed in the far end of the pen and turned his head toward them. But retreating and returning aren't the same direction. Willa stayed 4 days. She helped with morning feeding, learned how to read the gelding's body language in the pen, listened to Aldine talk about her father over coffee on the porch of the house. On the last morning, she stood in the barn aisle for a while without saying anything, then said, "He would have liked seeing you do this." "I think he did," Lenny said, "in whatever way people do." An envelope arrived on a Tuesday in November, forwarded from the Clermont County address. She recognized the return address, the law firm that had represented Chet. She opened it at the kitchen desk. It was not a legal document. It was a letter on plain paper, handwritten in Chet's particular sprawling penmanship, which she had once found charming. "Lenny, I heard you reopened your father's place. I heard it's running. I wanted you to know I didn't expect that. I'm not sure what I expected, but not that. I don't know if you want to hear this. I'm saying it anyway. See." She read it twice. Then she set it in the cigar box with the other letters. It was not an apology. It was not enough, and it was not nothing. and she recognized that holding both of those things at the same time was a kind of maturity that had been expensive to acquire. She went back to the barn. Winter settled over the hill country with the particular patience of a season that knows it will be obeyed. The cedar went dark and the limestone went pale, and the mornings smelled like cold rock and would smoke. Lenny found a rhythm that was hers the way few things had been. Up before light, coffee in the house, barn by first feed, horses, Audie arriving by 7, the particular quiet of animals eating in the early morning dark. She took in 4 more horses before the new year. Word was making its way east and west along the county roads the way it moves in places where people still talk to each other face to face, through feed stores and veterinary waiting rooms, and the kind of slow telephone where the message improves rather than degrades. A woman named Pharaoh drove out from 60 miles away with a mare that had been marked difficult at 3 previous facilities. She watched Lenny work the animal for 20 minutes, then said, "How long have you been doing this?" Lenny considered the question. 30 years of knowing and about 4 months of doing, she said. Pharaoh left the mare without hesitation. Aldine brought out a young woman from her county, Pell, who was trying to start a training operation with no formal background and considerable talent and no idea what she was doing wrong. Lenny took her on as an informal apprentice. She was not paying her. Pell was not asking to be paid. She showed up 3 mornings a week and watched and asked questions and went home and came back better. One afternoon, Lenny stood in the round pen while Pell worked a horse she'd brought from Aldine's place, and she recognized the expression on Pell's face. The focused stillness of someone whose mind had gone entirely quiet because there was a living animal in front of them demanding every cell of their attention. She had worn that face here as a teenager. She recognized it now as the face of someone becoming who they were going to be. One evening in January, Aldine sat on the porch with a cup of coffee going cold in her hands and said, "I've been thinking about expanding my operation. I don't have the infrastructure. You do. I don't have capital. I'm not talking about capital." Aldine looked at the barn. "I'm talking about an arrangement. I send horses your way. You run the training side. We split what it brings. Keeps both of us viable." Lenny looked at the barn, at the round pen, at the paddocks, fenced and functional now, holding 3 horses standing in the last of the light, at all the things that had been falling and were now standing. She thought about Chet and the careful financial architecture of the Ridgeback Ranch, the way every decision had been run through a model of returns and risk-adjusted projections. She thought about her father keeping a leather ledger full of names and needs and debts he never collected. "Send them when you're ready," she said. On a Saturday in February, Tilson drove out to collect his gelding. He watched Lenny ride the horse in the arena, a quiet, steady figure 8 with the kind of softness in the animal's back that only comes from patience applied correctly. And when she dismounted and handed him the reins, he stood for a moment looking at the horse with his hand on the animal's neck. "What do I owe you?" she told him. He paid and stood for a moment longer. "My grandfather boarded here when your father first opened. I remember coming out here as a boy. The place looked like this." "Exactly." He loaded the gelding and drove away. She stood in the gravel lot after the truck disappeared around the bend in Route 9 and felt the particular quality of a silence that is not empty, but full of everything that had happened in the past and was still somehow present, full of everything that was happening now and would continue to happen when she went back inside. She was 58 years old. She had lost a marriage, a ranch, a name, and a version of herself she had maintained for 3 decades at considerable expense. She walked back into the barn. The horses moved in their stalls. The leather apron hung on its nail. Her father's ledger was in the desk in the house. Upstairs in her pocket was the photograph from the tote bag, her standing in front of a horse with the sun in her eyes, looking like she knew exactly where she was supposed to be. She could not see the expression on her face in the photograph. She could feel it now. She went to work.